2025 was a year full of emotions, both personally and, of course, in the true crime productions here on the channel. It was also a remarkable year, of course, in the real crime scene. In Brazil and around the world, we had a bit of everything. Crimes that represent personal, family, and social tragedies, many cases of femicide and others of assaults against women, but where the victims survived by a miracle, let's say. For example, Juliana's story, who was assaulted with 61 punches in an elevator by her boyfriend. Jennifer de Oliveira also jumped from a second-floor window in Contagem, Minas Gerais, to escape being killed by her husband. There were several fatal cases of poisoning, and starting in September, a frightening wave of reports of methanol intoxication after consuming alcoholic beverages. It's also impossible not to remember June 21st, which was the day Juliana Marins, 26 years old, fell while hiking on Mount Rinjani, a volcano in Indonesia. The body of the Brazilian tourist remained exposed to the eyes of the whole world until June 24th, when the rescue took place. Led by the mountaineer Bung Agam, he volunteered to help in the rescue operation along with other climbers and volunteer rescuers. An extrememly dangerous operation that lasted about 7 hours. Another absolutely unexpected report was about the invasion of a lioness's enclosure at the João Pessoa Zoo, which resulted in the death of Gerson de Melo Machado, 19 years old, the little cowboy. A recent story now from November 30th with international repercussions. We had very complex and challenging investigations, which are still ongoing. Like in the case of the death of Vitória Regina de Carramar on February 26, 25, and also of the businessman Adalberto Amarillo dos Santos. The Interlagos mystery, which happened on June 3, 25. Stories that left us with heavy hearts, holding our breath, and above all, the expectation of learning the truth as well as seeing justice done. So, get ready, because we curated a selection focused on the crimes of 2025. And we will bring you 15 reports with the most up-to-date information so far. I'm Marcos Campos, you are always very welcome. And this is the retrospective of criminal cases from 2025. Leave a like or comment, even just an emoji. Message from the data, let's get to the facts.
The victim is a young man, only 18 years old, shot in the head during a New Year's Eve party in the São Simão community in Queimados in Baixada Fluminense. Kauan Galdino Florencio Pereira, he remains hospitalized in critical condition.
On New Year's Eve 2024-2025, Kauan Galdino Florencio Pereira, an 18-year-old from Rio, received news that literally made him jump for joy. He was committed to pursuing his life projects, working as an amateur player, looking for an opportunity to stand out in the national sports scene, and wishing to become a parachutist. And right at the turn of the year, he received a message from the army informing him that he, newly enlisted for mandatory military service, would be assigned to a parachute battalion. So it really was an occasion to celebrate the new year, wasn't it? In the early hours of January 1st, after 3 o'clock, the young man decided to go to his maternal uncle's house and from there head to a funk party in the Queimados neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. Unfortunately, after arriving at the place, Kauan got involved in an incident with Marcio Lucas Rosa de Sousa, 31 years old, known as Iron Man or Ironhead. Later, this man was identified as the area's drug trafficking manager. He was a dangerous individual who already had convictions for drug trafficking and had been free for a year after serving 8 years in prison. During that party, a simple step on the trafficker's foot and the absence of an apology from Kauan led to a quick argument between them and Marcio Lucas. Without thinking twice, he drew his gun and fired twice at Kauan, hitting the young man's head. Even after being rescued and transferred to a hospital, Kauan did not survive and his brain death was confirmed on the night of January 2nd. The family, even in shock, decided to donate the young man's organs. As for his killer, the information reported by the news was that the leaders of the criminal faction became irritated with Iron Man's attitude and, to avoid problems, ordered the execution of the criminal. But the police did not confirm this version.
Friends and family of Vitor Felisberto Medrado, 46 years old, gathered at a cemetery in the northwest region of Belo Horizonte to say their goodbyes.
It's my brother's logo, Vitor Medrado's. This is
15 days before Carnival, on the morning of February 13th, São Paulo and the whole country was surprised by the tragic death of Vitor Felisberto Medrado, a stupid robbery murder committed in broad daylight near Parque do Povo in the Itaim Bibi area. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Vitor was shot by two men who were passing through the area on a motorcycle. The robbers didn't even announce the robbery, they simply approached the victim, who was on a bicycle. They fired the gun, hitting Vitor in the neck, took his cell phone, which had fallen to the ground, and left. Vitor was rescued, but the cyclist did not survive his injuries. In 2016, Vitor's team won bronze in the team sprint event at the Brazilian Championship. In 2017, he got an athlete scholarship. He also worked as a sports consulting entrepreneur and had 3,500 followers on Instagram. Friends and colleagues describe him as a really good person, friendly and well-liked by those who knew him. The most shocking thing about this case is that Vitor was murdered without resisting, while he was simply standing with his bicycle. For reference, Vitor's ex-wife was previously robbed and lost her bicycle, worth about 90,000 reais. The day after the crime, Secretary of Public Security Guilherme Derit said footage analysis identified the motorcycle and alleged suspects. Later on, we found out that they were Jefferson de Souza Jesus, 27 years old, who was riding the motorcycle, and also Eric Benedito Verissimo, who was the shooter. The rider, known as Gordo do Parisópolis, had prior records for drug trafficking and receiving stolen goods. The two criminals were quickly arrested. They had a stolen motorcycle and a gun with its serial number removed. In this crime, there was also a third person involved, Suedna Barbosa Carneiro, 41 years old, known as the Crime Mom. She had financed the crime, which could mean that she provided the motorcycle and the weapon used by the criminals.
A young woman was kidnapped outside an evangelical church, held hostage in her own car, and killed on Sunday. The crime happened in Quixeramobim in the countryside of Ceará. Natany Alves, 20 years old, was overpowered by the criminals when she left the church to get something from her car.
Also in February of 2025, another barbaric and extremely shocking crime. The crime that victimized Natany Alves Sales, 20 years old, was what the police consider a crime of opportunity. The girl was a chemistry student and lived in Quixeramobim, which is in Ceará, a city with about 85,000 inhabitants. Nath was a talented girl who loved music and the visual arts, known for her dedication to academic life and involvement with her church. It was a Sunday, February 16th, around 1:30 in the afternoon. When the girl was alone getting into her car, she was approached by three criminals who were roaming the streets. After using alcohol and drugs, with completely bad intentions, they planned to steal a random vehicle to sell it and pay off their debts. So Nath was overpowered and kidnapped in her own car. In the end, she was taken to a neighboring town where the brutal murder took place. Later, the forensic investigation and the confession of the killers clarified that Natany was killed by being stoned. The searchers found the vehicle parked near the Quixada bus terminal, about 43 kilometers from the abduction site. But Natany was gone from the men. The police set up a perimeter and, in a short time, they were arrested and confessed to the crime and the location of the young woman's body, which showed signs of extreme violence and cowardice. The three scoundrels are Francisco Marcio Freire, 43 years old, Francisco Teodosio Ramos, also 43, and Jardson do Nascimento Silva, 23. And it's worth knowing that Marcio, for years, pretended to be an evangelical pastor, but in reality, his interests were something else entirely. According to his long criminal record, which includes an attempted murder in 2001, this resulted in a 7-year sentence and an escape from the Quixada prison in 2010, when staff and visitors were taken hostage. Another crime he committed was using the image of his own son, a child with a physical disability, as a way to gain sympathy from others and raise money. And as for the motivation behind this brutal crime against Natany, the car theft was supposedly to pay off a debt that Marcio Freire had at a brothel in Quijada. Thus, in August 2025, they were tried and convicted.
The case of little Arthur Ramos Nascimento, who was only 2 years old, this boy died last Sunday. Right, he had several injuries all over his body, and he also had injuries in his private parts. There are also indications that besides being tortured,
Arthur Ramos Nascimento, a child just 2 years and 11 months old, was murdered in February in Tabira, Pernambuco. The crime was exposed on February 16th when a neighbor of the family saw Arthur's motionless body and noticed signs of aggression. This woman immediately called the military police, who, upon arrival, confirmed the boy's death and launched a manhunt for those responsible. Giselda da Silva Andrade, 30, and Antonio Lopez Severo, 42, known as Frajola, are partners. The couple had been given the responsibility of taking care of little Arthur, while the boy's mother, Giovanna Ramos, was living and working in another state. As for the boy's father, Lucas Ribeiro, he has already passed away. Giselda was described as a mother of 3 children, and at some point she seemed to be a viable option to take care of Arthur, even though she and her partner had criminal records for drug trafficking and homicide. That's right, captured on February 18th, the 2 suspects were transferred to Tabira, where Antonio Lopez Severo was lynched by an enraged mob before he could be taken to prison. As we can see in the footage, as soon as the police cars arrive in front of the police station, people open the trunk and drag Frajola out. A brutal scene with gunshots, beatings, and explosions. Given the situation, the police car managed to leave the scene quickly to avoid the lynching of Giselda as well. She was there, in the little pen, in the trunk of the police van. The investigation needed to be completed. But it's worth knowing that the biological children of those people there said, in their statements to the police, that the parents frequently abused little Arthur. Other witnesses reported that Giselda maintained a systematic pattern of violence, taking advantage of her position as guardian to inflict cruel and unjustifiable physical punishments on the child. On the other hand, the civil police have opened an investigation to look into the lynching, identify those involved, and check if there was any failure in the police officers' procedures.
The man accused of killing 17-year-old Vitoria Regina de Souza in Cajamar will face a jury trial. He is being charged with femicide, kidnapping, and concealment of a corpse.
Another case from February. This year, 2025 without a doubt, will forever be marked by the case of the death of Vitoria Regina de Souza, a 17-year-old teenager from Cajamar, São Paulo, who disappeared when she left work on February 26th, around 11 at night. When she didn't come home and didn't answer calls on her cell phone, the case was reported to the police. The investigation recovered security footage near the mall where she worked, which recorded the young woman walking toward the bus stop. Her digital footprints were also analyzed, as well as her conversations with a friend, back at that moment when she was waiting for transportation and felt afraid of 2 guys who were acting suspiciously. That marked the start of one of the year's most complex investigations. For a week, the search for Vitoria Regina de Souza was constant and only ended on March 5th, when her body was found by a team from the municipal guard in the rural area of Cajamar, with the help of sniffer dogs. The corpse was already in an advanced state of decomposition and showed signs of a terrible death, involving a lot of violence and torture. As widely reported, Vitoria had her hair shaved off. She had deep throat wounds, was naked, hands tied behind her back, and partially dismembered. Gustavo Henrique Lira, her ex-boyfriend, voluntarily turned himself in at the Cajamar police station. He had to explain why he didn't respond to her message the night she disappeared. Even Mr. Carlos Alberto Souza, Vitoria's father, was investigated and considered a suspect at the time. But the focus of the investigation really fell on Michael Antonio Sales dos Santos, 27 years old, who was later charged with kidnapping, femicide, concealment of a corpse, and procedural fraud. Different and conflicting reports present Michael as Vitoria's ex, who allegedly killed the girl to prevent her from revealing their relationship to his wife. But he was also described as a stalker and that the crime was premeditated months in advance. This suspicion grew stronger after the contents of his cell phone were recovered, where there were many stored photos of Victoria, in addition to sending her messages containing images of knives and weapons. Details about the vehicle and the supposed captivity were never exactly clear in this case for those of us who were following it due to the DNA tests. According to news from November 2nd, now in 25, the São Paulo court annulled the confession of Michael Antonio, the only suspect in Vitoria's murder, but decided to take him to a jury trial, with no date set yet. And it's because of all this, because of these various aspects in Vitoria's case, that it is, without a doubt, one of the most remarkable cases of 2025.
This young woman was killed. Her body was found inside a house, and the reason for her death, according to the investigation reveals she was collecting a 400 reis debt. The report is by Wesley de Reis and Luana Takahashi.
A case that needs to stay on our radar is the femicide of Clara Maria Venancio Rodriguez, who was 21 years old, a crime committed at the beginning of March. Clara Maria was reported missing on March 9th. The young woman, originally from Uberlandia, was working as a kitchen assistant at an artisanal bakery in Belo Horizonte during the events. In addition to facing life's challenges with grace and kindness, she was known for her passions: skateboarding, graffiti, visual arts, and also cats. She eventually formed a toxic friendship with a colleague, Tiago Schaffer Sampaio, who was 27. From the girl's side, it was a sincere friendship, but from his side, it wasn't just friendship. Tiago had another intention, an unrequited sexual interest. But at the beginning of this year, she lent him 400 reis. 3 months later, on the night she disappeared, she went to Tiago's house to get that money back, as Tiago himself had invited her. But with him was a friend, someone Clara knew. A guy named Lucas Rodriguez, 29 years old, who was described as a jerk who promoted Nazism and didn't like Clara. Later that night, around 11:15, the girl even sent a message to someone else, saying that she had already received the money and was heading back home. It was a short trip, but Clara didn't make it home. After midnight, another text was sent from her phone and it said, "Hi, I'm fine. I'm busy right now." An unusual message that raised suspicions. So, after missed calls and unanswered messages, her phone finally went out of service, making it clear that something was wrong. This fact prompted the official report of Clara's disappearance. 3 days later, on March 12th, her body was found in a house in Uro Porto Preto, Pampulha, Belo Horizonte. It was buried under a layer of concrete. Where exactly? Well, right in the backyard of that guy Tiago's house, who confessed to luring Clara to his house under the pretense of settling the debt. Then, with the help of Lucas, that Nazi scumbag, he suffocated the girl with a chokehold. The suspects gave different motives. Tiago cited jealousy, while Lucas claimed hatred for her. It's also worth mentioning that Lucas expressed an interest in necrophilia, a possibility that was being investigated by the police, and both of them are in custody and will face a jury trial, with the date yet to be set.
Carolina had been Larissa's friend and confidant for 12 years. The Pilates instructor revealed that she was going through a crisis in her marriage. The reason? She found out about an affair. Her husband, the Dr. Luis Antonio Garnica.
So, 2025 won't be ending on the 31st, right? Not for these crimes, at least, near the end of March 2025. There was the case of Larissa Leoncio Rodriguez, a Pilates instructor from Ribeirão Preto, who was the victim of a suspicious death. She was 37 years old, had been married for 18 years to Luis Antonio Garnica, 38, an orthopedic doctor. In the initial account of her death, Larissa was found unconscious in the bathroom of the house by her husband. However, the supposed first aid he gave his wife, who was unconscious there, was never described in any emergency manual. If you know what I mean? When the emergency services were called, the paramedics only confirmed Larissa's death, but there was already rigor mortis, which means the death had occurred between 12 and 15 hours earlier. That's right. With no history of health problems and practically a fitness professional, Larissa's death couldn't be explained. So the body was sent to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, and the toxicology report confirmed the presence of chumbinho in her system. In other words, it was a case of poisoning. Of course, it could have been accidental or self-administered, but the investigators took a close look at Larissa's husband, a very discreet man on social media when it came to his marriage and personal life. However, the good doctor was an unfaithful husband. In fact, about 20 days before her death, Larissa Rodriguez had her suspicions confirmed when she found wine bottle corks with dates written on them and a box of sex toys in her husband's car. Faced with this betrayal, she decided to separate, but Mrs. Elizabeth Arabassa, Larissa's mother-in-law, begged her daughter-in-law not to end the marriage with her son, not to ask for a divorce. It soon became clear that this concern was because of the possible division of the couple's assets and future financial problems that were already appearing on the horizon. You thought the mother-in-law liked Larissa, right? A scenario with means, motive, and opportunity for one of those classic murders, right? But whoever pointed the finger at the husband was wrong at first. The person who was by Larissa's side in her final moments was her mother-in-law. Pay attention because the previous month there was another death in the family. When Natalia Garnica, Elizabeth's daughter, had suddenly passed away, the exhumation and toxicology tests proved that Natalia had also been poisoned with chumbinho. And we found out that Elizabeth had bought this product a few days before. Under investigation, the 68-year-old woman and her son, Dr. Luis Antonio Infil, claim they are innocent. Both are in jail charged with homicide and awaiting trial. Recent news now from December 16th updated us about this case. These reports say that the State Court of Justice will determine the district that will judge the case, since Pontal and Ribeirão Preto have refused this privilege. But the case is proceeding under judicial secrecy, and so we are here, just waiting.
A father who killed his own son, all of this just to get revenge on the child's mother. To the police, he said that he had already tried to trick the boy a day before the crime. He gave up, but the next day he threw the boy off the bridge. Now the police want to know if the boy was still alive when he was thrown.
Before the month of March ended, the country was shocked once again by the death of a 5-year-old boy, a case that happened in Rio Grande do Sul, a cruel crime called indirect femicide, or vicarious crime where a child is murdered with the aim of ruining the mother's life. The boy's name is Theo Ricardo Ferreira Felber. He was thrown from a bridge onto the rocks in the bed of the Vacacai River in the city of São Gabriel. It is reported that Theo's parents had been separated since October 2024, when Abigail Luisa Ferreira Felber, the boy's mother, decided to return to the city of Nova Hartz with her son, leaving Tiago Ricardo Felber, 40 years old. Unable to accept the relationship's end, Tiago devised two plans: to kill his wife and her possible boyfriends, or to murder his son to make Abigail suffer. However, these wicked ideas were well hidden in the mind of this demon. So, he asked the woman to let the boy stay with him for a few days to celebrate his 40th birthday. Abigail said there was no history of domestic violence and Tiago was a great father. In other words, nothing prevented the child from staying with his father. And here's a point that really raises all the red flags, right? Well, but in this context, of staying with the father, sadly, the man had already decided to execute Theo. On March 24, Tiago attempted to suffocate his son, but was unable to go through with it. That's why, on the following day, March 25th, he went to the bridge over the Vacacai River. There are images showing the father and son on a bicycle, with the boy sitting inside a plastic box. Later, the forensic side confirmed that Theo Ricardo was alive when he was thrown, and his death was caused by head trauma. There were no traces of alcohol or other substances in his body, thus ruling out any kind of sedation prior to the crime. After killing his son, Tiago had lunch at a restaurant in the city. He sent audio confessions to family and surrendered to the military brigade. At that moment, he was caught in the act and taken to the prison system. To his mother Abigail, he sent this message: "Be strong, girl. I just did something crazy, okay? Now you'll have to carry it in your heart forever. I just threw Theo off the bridge."
See, girl, be strong. I just did something wild. You'll have to carry it in your heart forever. I just threw him off the bridge.
Crimes orchestrated by twin sisters who are suspected of killing 4 people by poisoning. Domingo Espectacular had exclusive access to excerpts from the testimony of Roberta Veloso Ferreira, Ana Paula's twin.
The twins, Ana Paula and Roberta Cristina Veloso Fernandez, 36 years old, could have been seeking fame and success in various ways. For example, in fashion, music, or by exposing themselves on social media. But no, they were killing. Currently, both are in prison, and apparently their trial has not yet been scheduled. They are known to be involved in at least 4 homicides between January and May in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. There is some slightly different information regarding the sequence of events. But it is certain that Ana Paula, who was studying law at college, had a relationship with the young tourist Heider Mahazres, who was 21 years old. Suddenly, Ana Paula claimed to be pregnant, but Heider didn't believe her story, even with the presentation of fake evidence, including an ultrasound that was sent to his family. There were even threats involved. And in the end, things must have gone back to normal, because they went out together for a snack on May 23rd. That was Heider's last meal. Afterward, he felt sick and soon died in his condominium in Brás, São Paulo. And in a bold move, Ana Paula accompanied him to the hospital and later went to the police station to report the young man's death, claiming that Heider had used drugs, but this was denied by the young man's family. The investigation uncovered threats in Arabic and even Ana Paula's attempt to convince the Tunisian embassy that she was the young man's partner so she could take part in the repatriation of the body. The links in this criminal chain kept closing in and tightening around Ana Paula's neck and her twin Roberta Cristina, who apparently wanted to live as contract killers, charging 4,000 reais to commit a murder. Can you believe that? Psychopaths, arrogant, greedy, narcissistic, but lacking much intelligence. Ana Paula even falsely informed the police that she was being threatened by a stranger, thus drawing the investigators' attention to herself. The twins committed 3 other murders for money, where the victims died from poisoning. The sources mention using rat poison, which, as we know from several cases that happened in 25, is a pesticide illegally sold out there, right? It shouldn't be, but it is, and we're just waiting for this story to end. Where the final chapter is missing, right? The trial and the conviction.
The businessman who was found in a hole inside the Interlagos racetrack, it was indicated that he may have been placed there alive. 3 security guards are identified as the main suspects in the crime.
On June 3rd, the life of businessman Adalberto Amarillo dos Santos was exposed and turned upside down. What happened after his body was found inside a hole 2 meters deep and only 40 centimeters in diameter at a construction site near the Interlagos racetrack, where Adalberto and a friend had been attending a motorcycle event. The body was found by one of the construction workers, who at first thought it was a mannequin since he could only see the helmet. Still, the man called the police. That way, it was identified that the victim, with the helmet on his head and his hands up, wearing nothing but a jacket and underwear, was Adalberto. His corpse still had a lot of dirt on his face and hands. The investigation stated that Adalberto was placed in the hole already dead or unconscious, with no signs that he had reacted or tried to climb out. A complex story, surrounded by lies or poorly told stories and enigmas. Starting with this so-called friend of the businessman, who made several claims that the forensic reports did not confirm, such as drinking alcohol and using marijuana. The disappearance of the GoPro camera, Adalberto's helmet, the existence of a lover, the absence of his pants and sneakers, and the possibility that he had sexual relations before he died. All the clues, hypotheses, and theories were made public before they actually meant any real progress in the case, leaving the public confused and distrustful of the police's work, perhaps tarnishing the victim's morals and character. Anyway, many people were interviewed, and today, after 6 months, although there is no concrete certainty, let's say, about the circumstances of the businessman's death, for the civil police, what happened was a fight with the security guard who worked at the event, where the fatal blow would have been a chokehold, since Adalberto died from asphyxiation and had injuries on his knees. According to the authorities, a prime suspect is a mixed martial arts fighter who held a leadership position among the event's security guards. And that, on the day after the businessman's disappearance, he didn't go to work. We are now also waiting for the conclusion of the investigation. Of course, also the trial and the exposure of the guilty party or parties.
Rio Preto became involved in the case of 4 missing men in Paraná. 3 had left Rio Preto earlier in the week. The 4 were hired to collect a real estate debt. The police obtained footage from a bakery where the friends were last seen.
August of 25 brought a very solid case. In fact, I presented this case here on the channel, and this video is available for members. This case is a mystery involving 4 missing men, one of whom was the employer of the other 3. They were Robisli Hernani de Oliveira, 53 years old, Rafael Juliano Marascalque, 43, and Diego Henrique Afonso, 39, who were working for Alencar Gonçalves de Souza. An apparently simple business deal that ended up becoming very complicated for the friends, who had left São José do Rio Preto in São Paulo and went to Icaraíma in the northwest of Paraná to collect a debt of about 255,000 reais related to the sale of a property. The main suspects are Antonio Buscariolo, 60, and his son, Paulo Ricardo Costa Buscariolo, 22. The collectors arrived in Icaraíma on the afternoon of August 4th. They accompanied Alencar to Villarica to meet Antonio and Paulo for the first time. On that occasion, a payment proposal involved giving up a house in the city's urban area. But the men did not reach an agreement. The next day then, around 10:30, the 4 men went again to collect the debt, but they did not find the Buscariolo at home and returned to the city. Finally, they made a 3rd visit at noon, when they were in a Fiat Toro pickup truck and then disappeared. The police investigation later determined that the 4 victims were killed as soon as they arrived at the rural property, in an ambush and with no chance to defend themselves. The shots hit the men in the head and chest and were fired from 3 different locations by multiple shooters using 5 weapons, one of which was a rifle. The bodies and the vehicle were buried outside the city and were only recovered on September 19th, when the clothing and personal belongings helped identify the bodies. The men had police records and a history of collecting debts characterized by violence and threats. Some aspects of this account are still quite unclear, as the police were following a line of investigation in which the crime, beyond a business disagreement, might be related to illicit activities involving those involved. Different amounts were also mentioned, reaching up to 1 million reais. The men of the Buscariolo family are considered fugitives, and for now the case remains open. Let's say completely open, in every circumstance, right?
For the death of 3 women found on a beach in Ilhéus in the south of Bahia in August, there will be 60 more days for it to be concluded. The extension was granted by the court 2 days after the request from the civil police.
In August 2025, we also had a triple homicide in Ilhéus. Alexandra Suzart, 45, Maria Helena Bastos, 41, and Mariana Bastos da Silva, 20. They were caught by death on August 15th while taking a walk at Praia dos Milionários in the city of Ilhéus in the south of Bahia. A tragedy that left the residents frightened. Alexandra and Maria Helena were friends and teachers, and Mariana was Maria Helena's daughter. The 3 were seen alive and well around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 15th, walking along the sands of the beach. The footage recorded by the local cameras shows that the women were walking side by side, chatting calmly, with Mariana holding the dog's leash. But they didn't return, and their bodies were found the next day, on the 16th, by a group of young Christians connected to the churches the women attended. Unfortunately, they had been stabbed to death. The little dog, a witness who couldn't report what had happened, was given to the care of his late owner's family. The brutality of the crime and its location, one of the city's most famous beaches, demanded a quick response from the police. So they focused on the line of investigation that pointed to some homeless men and drug users who were believed to be hiding in the woods in the area as responsible for the murders. However, the similar injuries on the neck area that all the victims had raised the hypothesis of a single perpetrator of the crimes. 10 days later, Thierry Lima da Silva, a 23-year-old man, was caught in the act for drug trafficking, and he confessed to being involved in 4 homicides there in Ilhéus. That is his partner, Lucas dos Santos Nascimento, and the triple murder I just mentioned. Known to Bahia authorities since his teens for theft, robbery, and drug trafficking, he admitted to the crimes. However, the investigators' work continued, as did the technical forensics. As the prime suspect, he stayed in custody, despite contradicting himself during interrogation. All the links need to be closed, right? How many supposed homicides have we seen around here already, right? Turning themselves in, and it's not always what it seems. But of course, it seems unlikely that a robbery on the beach would end in 3 deaths, right? And that only one criminal could be responsible for the attacks, so much so that some sources suggested a crime of passion and other people involved. But that's what the investigation will still determine, and then the judge will decide.
Regarding the death of former Chief of Police Rui Ferraz, Fontes identified 2 groups of criminals. The first and most important is made up of shooters and criminals who directly supported the execution of the former Chief of Police.
In September, we learned that São Paulo State Civil Police Chief Rui Ferraz Fontes, 64, had died. Rui, a lawyer, was chief of the civil police from 2019 to 2022. He was always very active in fighting organized crime in São Paulo, especially against the first command of the capital. In fact, the chief was a well-known face because of the many interviews he gave over his 40 years of work in support of the state's public safety. After retiring from the civil police, he became Secretary of Administration for Praia Grande City Hall in São Paulo in January 2023 and served until his death. It was there that the crime occurred on that September 15th when he was leaving City Hall and was ambushed by armed men after a car chase. The vehicle he was in was chased, collided with a bus, and overturned. At that moment, the shooters, armed with rifles, fired more than 20 shots at him, a cruel and extremely cowardly attack. All the facts indicate a planned execution, with suspicion of involvement by the criminal organization, precisely because of the entire trajectory and career of the former police chief. In fact, just before his death, Rui Fontes had told some friends that he was concerned about his own safety because he felt unprotected and exposed to risks. The investigation has 2 main lines, one related to his work as a police officer and the other concerning problems that arose during his time working at the Praia Grande City Hall. Since the actions of the police chief went against alleged private interests in the municipality, it is known that 6 people have already been arrested in connection with the investigation, but the work has not been completed. For everyone, the boldness of the criminals was evident. And whatever else is behind this death.
About Tainara, who is the victim that was run over and dragged in an extremely cowardly way by Douglas da Silva, who remains in custody. Okay? She has undergone 3 surgical procedures so far.
An image shocked Brazil on November 29th. Tainara Souza Santos, 31, was run over and dragged by Douglas Alves da Silva, 26, a man she briefly dated. A man. The hit and run was intentional, an attempted femicide. What happened when Tainara was walking with a friend after leaving a bar in the north zone of São Paulo? After being hit by the vehicle, she was trapped under the car, which was being driven by Douglas, who kept driving for about 1 kilometer, changed lanes, and even overtook other cars. A friend of the criminal was with him inside the vehicle and confirmed to the police that Douglas ran over Tainara and even pulled the handbrake and accelerated to try to kill her. The motive was his inability to accept the end of the relationship. Besides the severity of the injuries, this brutality, all these injuries caused by the dragging, she lost her legs and underwent 3 more surgeries. That guy there, Douglas Alves da Silva, fled without providing help, but was arrested the next day and is being charged with attempted femicide. Reports say he was arrested in 2023 for illegally carrying a 9mm pistol. In June, he made a deal with the court, confessing to the crime in order to obtain the benefit of parole. 5 months later, he broke the agreement and committed the hit and run. Defense lawyers for criminals already know how it works, right? Sometimes they're too creative. The lawyer claimed that Douglas Alves da Silva didn't know the victim and that his client's fight was with Tainara's friend. We're not experts, but we know the strategy is to remove the crime's aggravating factors, right? But let's be honest, right, guys? Something this barbaric. Kind of, you know? It basically hits Control-Alt-Delete on any argument that could possibly support that. Okay. Let's say, of course, everyone has the right to a defense. I don't know, man. I don't know. Something like that. He's still going to be charged with attempted femicide, right? It's gonna be a bizarre sentence. He'll get all the benefits and more people will be at risk very soon, okay? Very soon.
Today, the bodies of a mother and her 4 children who were killed in an arson fire in Recife were buried. The husband, father of the children, confessed to the crime and was arrested in the act.
Also on November 29th, another cowardly crime shook the city of Recife. Isabela Gomes de Macedo Agiforte died. Also her 4 children, Aline 7, Adriel 4, Agnaldo 3, and Ariel 1. All of them died in an arson fire in the Ikawa community, west zone of Recife. Isabella was pregnant with her 5th child, and her oldest, Aline, was autistic. It was revealed the little girl suffered a violent head injury before the fire, which has since destroyed about 20 of the community's 30 houses. The fire department worked for more than 4 hours to control the flames, sending 8 vehicles and 26 firefighters. As you can imagine, the residents went through hours of despair as they watched their homes and belongings destroyed by the fire. However, for us, the greatest pain is knowing that the person responsible for the tragedy, for the tragic death of Isabella and her children, was her own husband and the father of the kids, a wretch, violent, and a murderer. Agnaldo José Alves, 39. After causing the fire, this miserable man fled, but later returned to observe the scene. At that moment, there was an attempt at lynching by the residents, but the police arrived at the scene. Thus, he was saved, caught in the act, taken to a hospital, and then sent to the prison in Abreu e Lima. Regarding the motive, what is known is that the relationship was marked by domestic violence. Agnaldo is described as a monster. But Isabel said that, although she wanted to leave her husband, she had nowhere to take her children. She then hoped that her mother would build a small room for her, so she could move in with the children. Known as a caring, responsible mother, she managed the house and was nearly invisible in the community. One of the neighbors even said that the children often asked for help, standing with their little hands outside the house, shouting, "Help, Auntie! Uncle, help me!" Unfortunately, in the community, there's a rule that everyone should mind their own business out of fear of retaliation. She also said we pretend not to see. Man, hell is right here on earth, isn't it? Agnaldo used a lighter to set fire to a rug that was placed under the top of the shack where the family lived. The flames spread quickly, and the mother and children couldn't get out of the house and save themselves because the door was locked. For everyone who was there, it's certain that the crime was premeditated, because days before, Agnaldo took a gas cylinder and his belongings from the house, even though he still stayed there. Clear evidence, right, of premeditation? That's shocking. Guys, quick thought. Are you aware of the Clara Maria case? So, there are mentions of protests organized by women's groups, okay? I believe you are absolutely right to protect and demand justice for Clara Maria's life. I also believe that women of all ages should be repeatedly warned and stay alert about the potential risks of certain situations like debt. Tell the guy to send a pics to your account. Don't go meet that jerk from your past. Got stuff at your ex's place? Go get it with someone else, right? With your dad, brother, or even the police. Don't underestimate people's ability to do wrong. Police, please listen when someone expresses concern. Don't wait for something bad to happen before responding. Regarding Natany's case, it would be best if the criminals served their full sentences in a closed regime for the entire court-determined period. Actually, that would be the least they could do, considering the crime, right? Since the victim received a death sentence and Natany's family will be forever imprisoned by pain and suffering. And I think this extra point about Natany's case applies to all the others too, right? These are extremely shocking cases. As I share this, we get even more outraged, right? Did you notice that at the end there, I started to go off script a bit because it's unbearable to hear so many things like that and just stay inert. A person stays inert in front of this and still manages to find reasoning for resocialization, for decent treatment, man. I'm sorry, but I can't. For the person who set fire to those locked up, that's a cruel medieval death. And for the man who dragged a woman with his car because she wanted to leave him. How can someone do that? That's inhuman. How could someone do such a thing? Someone like that can't be free, can't just serve a sentence. That sentence has to be infinite. They have to stay in prison until the day they die. Because how are you going to let a guy like that go? How is he rehabilitated? A guy with that kind of brain disorder can't be rehabilitated. But that's just my opinion. This was the 2025 case retrospective video. There are many others that wouldn't fit here. The video is already huge. I hope you enjoy it. I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for your company with me in the 2025 season. It was a really tough year, right? Just like in all the other seasons, we also tried to live up to the channel's motto, which is, there are stories that need to be told. I wish you all an excellent 2026. May God richly bless you. Thank you again for your company, and I hope you'll be with me for the whole 2026 season. Thanks again, a kiss from Rivo, and see you next year.